Welcome back, Honors. All right, welcome back to it. Welcome to your Saturday flip, right? At the house, wearing the old comfy sweatshirt, getting after it a little bit, got my cup of coffee. The babies are sleeping right now. Probably not anymore after that clap and that really, really loud noise. But, oh, there they are. Hey, bro. So the big thing, though, that we actually left off in class talking about is we're talking about, of course, the campaigns of Julius Caesar. We're talking about his ascension into power. We talked about his civil war against Pompey. We talked about how Crassus and his daughter dying in childbirth and stuff like that. Crassus didn't die in childbirth, but died out in Turkey and stuff, led to the destruction of the first triumvirate. We talked about his ascension to power. Crossing the Rubicon is going to be a very big event that is going to be on the test. So in the nutshell, though, and looking at the entire thing, the thing we left off on was Pompey's dead, head in a basket. Caesar opens it up, looks at it. He's like, what the heck? What were you doing? I wasn't going to do all that, blah, blah, blah. Now, when he returns to Rome, though, okay, after defeating Pompey, he had been declared dictator multiple times, right? So, during the civil wars against Pompey, after he actually showed up in Rome and had more supporters than Pompey did, they actually proclaimed him dictator more than once, right? They declared him dictator at one point for, a small portion of time, and then for 10 years, and then at one point, they declared him dictator for life, right? But of course, when they had declared him dictator for 10 years, his trusted servant, his trusted plebe general, his trusted right-hand man, Mark Antony, even at one point, walked up to Caesar with a gold crown, much like the one that I have in class, and handed it to him, and Caesar waited for the crowd's reaction as they were stunned that they had just handed a crown to a man, demonstrating that he might become a king, and Caesar just took it and cast it onto the ground and was like, there is no king of Rome, only that of Jupiter, right? And the crowd went nuts and went wild. They were like, oh my God, he's the best, right? So, and he's a very strong leader, okay? So that's one of the big reasons why I think he's such a cool figure, is because he's a very, very strong leader, right? Send him out to Gaul, you think he's going to die? Nah, he takes the whole thing over, right? You got a wall? I built a better wall, right? So, do all these different things to him, he just keeps bouncing back. Tell him he can't cross the Rubicon, he does it anyway. Goes down to Egypt, meets Cleopatra, all this other crazy stuff, right? Actually, at one point, too, in that crazy story, after he had met Cleopatra, a bunch of Ptolemy, her brother's soldiers actually showed up to try and find her and also run Caesar out of town. And Caesar's soldiers were actually fixing to load ships up to return to Rome, so he was kind of alone, and he had to run through the streets of Alexandria to avoid being killed by Egyptian soldiers, and he actually apparently dove off of the lighthouse of Alexandria to save his own life, and then swam over to a ship, vowing to come back and take them over and stuff, which is a crazy little thing. It's he meets Cleopatra and then's got to run away when her brother husband shows up. Now, anyway, but looking at the whole thing, though, he's the man. Now, looking at the whole thing, though, is when he was declared dictator, he was a very, very strong leader. Created more jobs, expanded citizenship to many, many conquered people, and did all these really, really amazing things. He gave land directly to veterans, creates the city-state of Tuscany specifically for them. He starts stripping land from senators. He does all these things. Now, what I just said, though, is very key. Starts stripping land from senators, right? So, looking at this right now, the senators are just like, oh God, this guy represents everything we hate so much. So, because he is a populare and the senators are all optimates, right? And those two conflicting ideologies, the optimates supporting the wealthy and the populares like Caesar supporting the people, start to really clash together, right? And so in that moment, apparently a bunch of guys got together and they started to conspire about the idea that Caesar must be taken down because the Roman people don't know what's good for him, right? And so these men that came together to conspire this idea, two key figures. One of them is named Brutus, right? So write that down. Brutus, B-R-U-T-U-S. And then the next one, okay, I think it's Lucian Brutus, but whatever. Brutus, and the next one is Cassius, right? C-A-S-S-I-U-S. They conspire an idea together that they want to go out and they want to actually have Caesar executed, right? But they know for a fact that there's no way that the people of Rome are going to conspire to do this, get on board with it. So they're going to show classic Caesar. Get it? So anyway, what ends up happening is a very terrible day in history to me, but we still celebrate it with donuts and stuff like that in my class. It's an event known as the Ides of March, right? And then the Ides of March in 44 BC, while actually Julius Caesar is heading to a Senate meeting inside of a building called the Theater of Pompey, that Pompey himself had the money donated and had built. And in that same theater, there was a giant naked statue of Pompey, holding a globe in one hand and a robe over his other arm, and just standing there above everyone or whatever, all naked. And he was actually apparently going to the theater of Pompey to meet with the senators to discuss new laws and different things like that after he had been declared dictator for life, right? And so the Roman Republic then lashes back at him, and the senators, 17 of them, get together because they feared he was going to make himself king, and they stabbed him to death in the theater of Pompey, actually right at the feet of Pompey, the statue of Pompey himself. It is said that the bottom of the statue of Pompey was stained with Caesar's blood. And so the ultimate fate of those two great men actually were the exact same. Pompey's not great, though. He's pretty awful. That's why they called him Kid Butcher. Now, anyway, also, who names themselves the Great? But in the long run, though, Caesar would be stabbed to death a total of about 20-something times, and he actually went down defending himself, though, okay? There are mixed reports on what happened. Some Roman historians said that apparently when Caesar was being stabbed to death, he pulled his toga over his face and said, "Why all this violence?" He apparently might have said that. And then also there are other accounts that say that he pulled out a pencil from his toga and started stabbing at the feet of the assassins and went down fighting, right? So, it's a very, very convoluted storyline, though, because a lot of Romans kind of tend to exaggerate their deaths, right? For example, there was this one guy named Cato the Younger that absolutely hated Caesar, and when Pompey died, and, basically all the Pompey supporters were going to be rounded up and possibly executed or put on trial, Cato the Younger, apparently, according to the story, tried to stab himself in the stomach to kill himself, but he stabbed in and missed everything important, right? Slid the blade between his stomach and his intestines, and his servants came up and they were like, "We can stitch you up, big fella." And then Cato said, "No!" And then apparently stuck his hand in and grabbed all his intestines and started pulling them out, right? So, literally he eviscerated himself, right? So the thing about it is we don't necessarily know the direct account of what happened on the day of the Ides of March. I like to believe the story, though, that he went down stabbing their feet with a pencil. Also, we do know that William Shakespeare interpreted this idea of him going, "Et tu, Brute," because Brutus was apparently the first one to get his stab in, right? Another big reason why someone's referred to as a backstabber is because actually Brutus stabbed him in the back. And so the big thing, though, going into it, right, on understanding this whole concept, is Brutus and Cassius now believed that they had done something good, right? They thought that the people of Rome would rally behind them and freak out and be like, "Yay, the tyrant is dead." But that's not what happened at all, right? So, that's not what happened at all. And so the next series of events is going to lead us directly into this period known as the Empire period, right? So from the years of 44 to 29 BC, you are going to see the destruction of the Republic. You're going to see the changing of the Republic, and you're going to see the rise of the Roman Empire, right? So looking at this entire understanding, you have to understand it all revolves around this key figure. Caesar himself, Julius Caesar, is now dead, right? So, and he died in 44 BC on the 15th of March. That's why it's actually referred to as the Ides of March, because the word Ides means the middle of, right? So now that he has been assassinated, that left no one to rule. A very large power vacuum has now been created in Rome, and the senators believe that they are going to exert their control back over Rome. Well, the problem is that Brutus and Cassius fled, right? Because the people of Rome were actually really upset because you just killed their guy that they would consider maybe letting be king, and they elected him dictator for life, right? You killed the man that gave them land. You killed the man that gave them money. You took away all of the ideas that this guy had for helping the plebeians of Rome. And so Brutus and Cassius run away. When they run away to Greece, another man comes back from Greece, right? And Rome is in the middle of yet another civil strife and civil war and a series of rebellions, right? So as Cassius' guys flee over to Greece, there is a man in Greece that is waiting for his moment, right? And he is going to use the civil war that is raging between pro-Julius armies being led by Mark Antony, which is a very important understanding you need to know, and the anti-Julius Senate armies being led by guys like Cicero, right? So Cicero is a very famous figure. If you're in Latin Miss Urso, you definitely know who Cicero is, right? So the big thing going into it, though, is this man has a name, all right? And that is an unfortunate bust. This statue of him is way, way better, all right? So, that guy right there goes by the name Octavian, right? So Octavian Caesar. Octavian is actually Caesar's grandnephew, right? He is the son of one of his he is the son of, he is the son of one of his grandchildren. Yeah, so one of his other daughters had a child, right? and then that child had a child, and that child's name was Octavian, right? Now, Octavian, though, because Caesar was basically predicting the fact that he would need someone to pass his estate onto, his hereditary rights onto, his money onto, and also his debt onto, because that's another thing about Roman understanding, is that debt follows with you. He had to pass all that on to somebody. And since he didn't have any sons, and women necessarily weren't allowed to inherit that much property in Rome, he had to adopt somebody. And so who he adopted was Octavian. He adopted him as his son posthumously, right? So basically saying in his will, when I die, I adopt my son, I adopt Octavian Caesar as my son, not my nephew, right? And so this guy has now been adopted as the son of Caesar, and following the death of Julius, Octavian returns to Rome, right? He returns to Rome because of two reasons. One, because he was in Greece this entire time studying, right? So, apparently Octavian was very, very intelligent, right? Very, very book smart, was obsessed with different things like philosophy and mathematics, and also astronomy. He found the space and time and stars and their movement patterns to be fascinating. So he spent years studying that while he was in Greece, using the works of the philosophers and many of the libraries that were there actually in Greece and places like the former Athens and other major Macedonian cities. And so while he was over there and studying all this stuff, the senators believed that, we'll bring his new kid back who's like a bookworm nerd. We'll bring him back and he'll be super easy to manipulate. So the senators, including people like Cicero, were like, let's bring Octavian back to Caesar, give him a couple of legions, and we'll send him up to the north of Italy where Mark Antony is with the pro-Julius armies, and those guys will be able to destroy the rest of this entire shenanigans, right? So they were thinking that Octavian would be able to march an army up there, and then that army would beat Mark Antony's army because the army would be much bigger, and he would go up there and defeat him, right? Now, the thing that ends up happening, though, is these senators are idiots, right? They're dumb. They're so dumb because he's not actually a pushover. He's actually a genius, right? He knows what you're doing. He knows that you're trying to puppet him, and he did, though, play along for a little while. He marched his armies all the way up to the north of Italy, went all the way up, had a clash with Mark Antony, but then after a small battle, he sent an envoy to Mark Antony saying that he wanted to discuss terms with him, right? And apparently that evening, they met inside of a tent, and Octavian and Mark Antony decided that they would not actually fight each other, that they would actually ally with one another. Octavian being the new adopted son of Caesar, Mark Antony being basically like the battle-adopted son of Caesar, this guy, his right-hand man, a very close officer in Caesar's armies during all these campaigns, the man that was with him the day that the Rubicon crossing occurred. They decide to ally. And they march on Rome, right? They combine their legions together, and they start heading to Rome, right? And the big thing happens is, a lot of y'all are like, this doesn't sound like a very nice move. He sounds like he's pulling a Sulla, right? He is pulling a Sulla, right? He's pulling a Sulla, and he's heading on down there, and he decides that he has to do one thing very quickly. Octavian and Mark Antony must cure the debt problems that Julius Caesar left behind, right? And since Julius Caesar left behind so much debt, they decide that they're going to do two birds, one stone, right? So two birds and one stone. You're going to get rid of a bunch of these senators, and you're going to raise a lot of money really, really fast. So for any kind of trip or whatever, if you want to decide to do a fundraiser, use a hit list like Octavian did, right? So Octavian apparently created a list, right? When he actually showed up in Rome and marched on it, declaring him and Mark Antony to be the new leaders of the area. Also with this other guy named Marcus Lepidus, who we'll get to here in a minute. They made a list of senatorial families, senator families, over several hundred of them, on a list saying, all people of Rome, if you go out and find any of these men and bring them back before the Roman councils, we will actually reward you with a price on their head of a bounty, right? We will give you money. But the thing about it is, who gets to keep the rest of the money that those senators own? They gave a small fraction to the person that brought them in, but then Octavian, Mark Antony, and Lepidus stripped all of the rest of the finances, the land, and the goods away from those senatorial families. And they raised a massive amount of money. A massive amount of money. Best fundraiser ever, right? So Octavian, being Caesar's grandnephew, then forms this thing known as the second triumvirate, right? Again, that's why me and Mr. Witterson and Mr. Mathern are the third triumvirate. But the second triumvirate is made up of Octavian Caesar, Mark Antony, and Marcus Lepidus. And it had more power than the first triumvirate, right? So the first triumvirate was a political alliance to get men elected to something. The second triumvirate, though, actually acted as a three-way dictatorship, right? To try and avoid stirring the pot in Rome any further and creating any more craziness. They were like, look, we'll act as a three-way dictatorship, kind of like three consuls all at the same time, right? So, and what we'll do is we will then use this dictatorship to go out, capture, and kill the men who killed Caesar, right? And they did all this within like a year and a half, right? So like Octavian, Mark Antony, and Lepidus being the commander of a small navy and things like that, Mark Antony having a lot of ground troops and military experience, and Octavian having the smarts and the political know-how to make it and finagle this. Octavian and his new buddies decide that they're going to go out, they're going to head over to Greece, they're going to defeat Brutus and Cassius in battle, right? So, and what ends up happening is they do that successfully. They actually defeat the final armies of Brutus at this place called the Battle of Philippi. And at the Battle of Philippi, actually, ironically enough, Octavian wasn't even there. Some people think that he ran away. Some people called him like soft and a pansy and all this other stuff. But what ends up happening, though, is Cassius and Brutus both kill themselves, right? Cassius stabs himself to death. Brutus actually runs into his own sword while two of his soldiers are holding it up like this. And so a crazy thing has occurred, though, is now Octavian has risen to power with these two associates, that of Mark Antony, that the people of Rome know very well, and also who's a plebeian, which is a really big deal for a lot of people in Rome, and Marcus Lepidus have now risen to power and also defeated the men who killed Caesar. So the people of Rome are super loving of him right now. And then also, not to mention the fact that Octavian, then even after defeating them at the Battle of Philippi, proclaimed Caesar a god, right? He said not only was Caesar a great man, not only was he a phenomenal person, not only did he save that of the spirit of Rome, but now he is ascending to the pantheon of gods, right? And apparently he did this at a very all-important ceremony that took place inside of the Circus Maximus, right? There were all these people there. They were watching games and stuff, and it was at night, and they were actually sacrificing a bunch of people. All those senators, a bunch of those senators that they actually captured using that hit list were executed on this day as human sacrifices, which is not something Romans do. Romans only ever human sacrifice anybody in times of great distress or despair. Like, for example, one time they buried two people alive and they were fighting against some other army, but that was in the kingdom period. So, but what I'm getting at, though, is that that's not something Romans do. They don't sacrifice people. So what you're seeing right now is that Octavian's got like a little bit of an evil streak to him, right? He's sacrificing human beings in front of other human beings, right? He's having them executed in front of giant games. And in that moment, when they're executing all these people, apparently he said, Romans, lift your eyes to the sky and you will see Caesar, Julius Caesar, ascending to the heavens as a god. Remember, Octavian studied astronomy. He knew that on that very night, a comet would streak over through the skies and all the people of Rome saw it. Which, wait a minute, that means that Octavian is now the adopted son of a god, right? So he's now exerting even more power. And Octavian's kind of evil streak is beginning to appear. Because you have to understand, Octavian is a very morally disputed figure. He does a lot of great things, he does a lot of bad things, right? Most of the bad things have to do with him asserting his presence as the very first emperor, right? A lot of his good things have to do with what he did after he became the emperor. He actually did a lot of really, really positive stuff and helped out the people of Rome. So it's a kind of like a mixed bag of stuff. Now, following the death of Brutus and Cassius, though, the second triumvirate is going to split the empire, and they're going to decide to rule a third of it each, right? And so what it kind of looked like was, if you're looking at it right here, Octavian kind of got like this area of the Roman Empire, including Italy itself, and then this little chunk right here, right? And then Mark Antony is going to get this whole section right here, including Greece, the outskirts of Turkey, but then also Egypt, right? He got that stuff right there, which is a very, very important little key piece of information to understand, because he starts dating somebody because he meets her while he's ruling over all this stuff, right? And then you got Marcus Lepidus, who nobody cares about whatsoever, who's actually ruling this area of North Africa. So basically, it's the second triumvirate, including Octavian, Mark Antony, and leading all of this different stuff. And the only reason no one cares about Marcus Lepidus is because no one cares about Marcus Lepidus. So it's basically these two guys actually just ruling everything, because nobody cares about Marcus Lepidus, because all he is the ruins of Carthage, right? So, like, nobody even wants that stuff. So they decide to split it, though, and they cut it up into these different thirds. And what ends up happening, though, is Mark Antony starts cheating on his wife with none other than Cleopatra, right? He actually starts cheating on his wife, Cleopatra, and has 3 kids with her, right? Crazy thing does end up happening, though, is while Mark Antony's cheating on his wife, Cleopatra, his real wife, named Flavia, actually ends up rebelling against Augustus at one point and trying to hold, like, some instability issues, and Augustus ends up killing her armies and killing her, too. So, like, Lepidus, though, also eventually, after this rebellion of Mark Antony, Octavian starts to be really paranoid, and he's like, I'm going to need your armies, Lepidus. So he strips all of the army and land from Marcus Lepidus, and he plans to use them and combine them together with what he has after defeating Mark Antony's wife in a rebellion, Flavia, after defeating her in this rebellion, and he's going to go out and he's going to go after Mark Antony, right? And he decides that he's like, I'm going to destroy Mark Antony because he's allying with that snake down there in Egypt, Cleopatra. And he's going to try and combine Roman and Egyptian armies together and try to head him off, right? And so what ends up going down is a war breaks out between Octavian, Mark Antony, and Cleopatra. Cleopatra was banking on the fact that she was going to be able to basically become queen of Rome eventually because she would just pick the right Roman man to side with and she would be able to show up, right? Now, the thing about it is Cleopatra always picks the wrong guy, right? Because Octavian and Mark Antony and Cleopatra headed off and they actually had one giant battle against each other, this place called the Battle of Actium, right? And it was a huge naval battle that Octavian straight up won, right? Like he won in a big way because at the beginning of the battle, Mark Antony and Cleopatra just like fled, right? So now eventually Octavian does end up beating their combined forces, he claims Egypt as his own, and he creates a new Rome that now surrounds the entirety of the Mediterranean, right? He takes over Egypt, he's going to use their wheat as basically their breadbasket because for a long time the Romans left the Egyptians alone because the Egyptians were so good at farming and they provided so much food to the Roman Empire. Now, in this whole process, though, of this war, Mark Antony and Cleopatra end up dead, right? Mark Antony actually kills himself as well with a blade, and then actually Cleopatra, finding out that Mark Antony had killed himself, actually reaches into a basket with a snake in it, pulls a cobra out, and shoves it against her chest and actually kills herself, death by snake, right? So now the crazy thing, though, is now Octavian is the sole ruler of all of Rome, right? And Octavian became dictator in 27 BC, and he says that he restored the Republic. Now, this is an honors concept that you really need to understand that can get really confusing as we talk about this. But Octavian is going to do a lot of important stuff, right? He is going to immediately, he's like, I'm going to give power back to the Republic. I am no different from any of you. I am the first amongst equals, right? So, weird little system he set up right here. First of all, he changes his name from Octavian to Augustus, right? Becoming the first true emperor of Rome. And we'll get into that more here in a second. But he also created this thing known as the Principate System. The Principate System was where the Roman Republic would operate the way that it always had, right? Two consuls, one patrician, one plebeian, the tribunes with their veto power over the Senate. The Senate, he also expanded, though. He actually at one point got it up to almost 900 senators. So the Senate was going to be over here, citizen assemblies, you'd have your praetors, your magistrates, all your censors, your quaestors, all your other things in your big hornet's nest of a government, right? But then what Augustus now, what he did is he placed himself at the top of it. And he said, I am the first amongst equals. He basically created himself into a person that the entire Roman government must channel itself through, right? So, he could veto their actions, could do whatever he wanted to, and he created a system where he was like the overseer of the Roman Republic. But as time went on, people began to call him the emperor, right? So now the thing about being an emperor, though, is where that word comes from is the word imperator. So remember when I talked about Julius Caesar's triumph parades and Pompey had some triumph parades and everybody had these triumph parades where a guy behind you would be like, hey, don't forget, you're not a god, you're just a man. That's on those days when you would get that and you would wear the purple toga and you would wear the gold breastplate and you would have the laurel wreath crown on. The thing about it was you were referred to as an imperator. You were referred to as a general with a great victory, right? But over time, they kept calling Augustus our imperator, the imperator Augustus, and it basically devolved into the emperor Augustus, right? And that's where the word comes from. And so also you have to understand that Augustus is a genius. He had figured out a way to engineer the Senate so that 2/3 of it was loyal to him in anything that he wanted to do. The way he did this is he kept them in fear, right? Remember last time a bunch of senators wanted to go against Augustus? They all ended up dead in the middle of the Circus Maximus during a giant ceremony where they all ended up being sacrificed, right? So 2/3 of the Senate's loyal to him because he expanded it, helped appoint these new senators. They were all going to be loyal to him, and the ones that he didn't kill off were like, okay, I'm scared of this guy. And they were also might have been pro-Julius Caesar in the first place. So it's like 66% of the Senate was like, okay, we love this guy. And they could overrule anything that the actions that the anti-Augustus people did, right? So big thing about it is in this moment, this is where Augustus kind of gets a little bit hard to analyze, right? Because he killed people to come to power. He had bounties placed on families, right? He destroyed the armies of a close ally because he was threatened by them out of his paranoia. In the nutshell, this guy is the true definition of a dictator when you talk about his rise to power. But then the years after his rise to power are literally called the era of Roman peace, right? It's called the Pax Romana. So from the reign of Augustus starting in 29 BC for 200 more years, all the way up to the reign of this guy named Marcus Aurelius, who would be a big name that we'll talk about in class tomorrow, there's going to be 200 straight years of Roman peace. There's going to be literally just years on years on years of Roman peace. And what we mean by Roman peace is not necessarily the fact that nobody was fighting wars, but just Romans weren't fighting each other, right? So, last 200 years, and it was a massive golden age. And in this golden age, Augustus becomes the first true emperor of Rome, and under the leadership of Augustus, so many things were accomplished, right? He had a constitutional monarchy set up where basically he created himself at the head of a system where there was a constitutionary system that kind of limited his power a little bit, right? So, like, he didn't have, like, full overarching power, 100% all the time. He still had to work with the Senate a little bit, so he basically created the very first constitutional monarchy, right? Laws were going to be passed, giving citizens way more rights, right? Citizenship would be expanded to so many more people. Romans are going to be the very first people also to take a census. Augustus has the entirety of the Roman Empire counted, so he knows exactly how many people live in the empire, how many people he can expand citizenship to, how to create fair and legal elections, and then also how to create an efficient tax system. He had roads and infrastructure expanded. He had plumbing built in the city of Rome. Well, it was always there, but he had it expanded and had made it better, right? New government buildings are going to be built. He's going to expand the aqueduct system. Molly Jernigan, I know you know what an aqueduct is. We'll talk about that when we get into class. He also creates the very first professional army, meaning the fact that they have rank and file and they get paid for their services, picking up on the reforms of his great-great-uncle Gaius Marius, right? And he also created this thing called the Praetorian Guard. And the Praetorian Guard was the secret service for the emperor. It's a specific military unit that protects the emperor or the imperator or the Principate or whatever you want to call them, protects them at all times. Now, the interesting thing about the Praetorians, though, is they end up exerting a lot of power as time goes on due to their position in Roman politics because of the person that they actually protect. But we're actually going to wrap it up right here. We'll talk about it a little bit more in class. We might end up editing your study guide a little bit that I'm going to post this weekend. We might end up taking some things off. We might leave the fall of Rome for the next unit, but we'll figure that out then. I'll talk to y'all soon. Y'all have a good one.